I'm gonna kick things off with our first panel of the day, which is Bad Bunny and the Politics of Representation. And moderating this panel is the fabulous Daniel Vázquez Sanabria from the University of Texas at Austin, and they're gonna introduce the presenters.
Hi everybody, good morning, buenos dias. So first off, we have the wonderful Alisa Maldonado Estrada, pronouns she, her. Alisa Maldonado Estrada is an assistant professor of religion at Kalamazoo College, where she holds the Marlene Crandall Francis Chair in the Humanities. She is an ethnographer and scholar of men and masculinities, material culture, and urban religion, in addition to authoring Lifeblood of the Parish, Men and Catholic Devotion in Williamsburg, aquí en Brooklyn, the best borough. She has written on religion and Colombianidad and Latinx material culture and gentrification. She is editor of Material Religion, the Journal of Objects, Art, and Belief. And she is the co-chair of Men and Masculinities and Religion Unit at the American Academy of Religion. She received her PhD in religion from Princeton University and hails from New York City's Lower East Side. So that's Alisa, and then after Alisa, we're gonna have the wonderful Luis, also a UT Austin compatriota, Hook'em. Luis is a PhD candidate in the Radio, Television, and Film Department at UT Austin. His research focuses on the transnational flows of Latin music in the United States, Latin America, and the Hispanic Caribbean, and his work can be found in the Journal of Latin American Communication Research and Flow, TV. In addition, Luis is and has worked on the editorial team of journals such as the Journal of Latin American Communication Research, the Velvet Light Trap, The Sinus, and Flow TV again. After Luis, we're gonna have Laura Perez from Harvard. Laura is a PhD candidate at RLL Spanish and Latinx track. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, Laura Perez Muñoz earned their BA in psychology at the UPR and later pursued their MFA in writing and activism at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Again, Brooklyn. Currently, their research focuses on the queer dictions of Puerto Rican literature and poetry, anti-colonial studies, Caribbean and Latin American, diaspora studies, immigration and border theory, feminism, performance, and visual narratives. I also want to revisit Luis for a moment because his birthday was 2 days ago and he didn't tell anybody, so happy birthday, Luis. I was reading through these because I got information as I came here, so I need to make sure that everything is included. And then finally, we have the wonderful, the one, the only, Vanessa Diaz, who recently was given tenure. That is important to say. So, Vanessa is an associate professor in the Department of Chicano and Latinx Studies at Loyola Marymount University. She's a multimedia ethnographer and journalist whose work focuses on issues of race, gender, and labor in popular culture across the Americas. Grounded in her experience as a red carpet reporter for People magazine, Diaz's first book, Manufacturing Celebrity, Latino Paparazzi and Women Reporters in Hollywood, received the 2022 Book Award for the Association of Latina, Latino, and Latinx Anthropologists and the Society for the Anthropology of Work, as well as honorable mention for the Latin American Studies Association Latino Studies Section Book Award. Professor Diaz is the co-creator of the Bad Bunny Syllabus Project, check them out, co-author of UCLA's 2017 Hollywood Diversity Report, director of the bilingual documentary film Cuban Hip Hop, Desde el Principio, and the senior media editor for Transforming Anthropology. Her research has been profiled in such outlets as NPR, The Atlantic, The Los Angeles Times, and NBC News.
Morning, everyone. Thank you all for waking up early on a Saturday to be here with us and go on this journey. So in February and March 2023, when Bad Bunny's promiscuous heterosexuality was newly oriented toward white American women, Latinas across social media began cheekily declaring that they were in their Fade and Rao eras. Why did Fade and Rao become the ones most visible in popular discourse? How can we understand these two contemporary reggaeton icons through an exploration of their style? Do they offer alternative reggaeton masculinities? And what does reggaeton masculinity look like post Bad Bunny? Contextualizing Fade and Rao's aesthetics takes us from Medellin as a history of Colombian exceptionalism to Saturno, Rao's futurist visual manifesto inflected with Japanese pop culture. Following the Un Verano Sin Ti model, artists, I think, now are constructing these ultra-cohesive aesthetics. Rao is the otaku reggaetonero, the sleek, anime-obsessed futurist, and Fade, aka Fercho, is the paisa homeboy who serves medallo realness with a smile. So if you're in the know, you can't see the color green without thinking of El Fercho. His carefully curated look has become iconic and endlessly replicable. A formula of a green backwards fitted, Oakley wraparounds, and a flip of messy, bleached hair that licks the back of his neck. Fade is all monster trucks, Monster Energy drink, and moto culture. And his aesthetic and his use of Colombian slang is his differentiator. He models himself as an emissary for la cultura paisa, meaning he brings a Medellin specificity to his music. And he narrates his ascent as this kind of underdog quest to distinguish himself from Puerto Rican and Panamanian reggaetoneros. As he told Billboard, "Para sobresalir, tengo que ponerme esa arepa con quesito aquí en la mano y decir que yo soy paisa." Fade's paisa alterity reflects this broader history of Colombians from Antioquia distancing themselves from proximate others in terms of language, looks, and sensuality. Medellin is the capital city of the Departamento de Antioquia, and it's important to note that Colombia is a nation of regions with a moral topography and a history of environmental determinism, where altitude and highlands, lowlands, and coastal regions are thought to define the moral and racial quality of residents. Geographers and Colombia's founding fathers theorized Antioqueños in the Northwest Highland region to be a race apart, and claimed that the highland zone keeps one's skin white and mind clear, and the mind and skin degenerate as one sinks into the muck of the tropics. 20th century Colombian intellectuals painted Antioquia as home to the most beautiful and vigorous race in Colombia. And in contrast to Afro-Colombians, costeños, Antioqueños were thought not to be overly sensuous or uncontrolled, and they had a layer, it was claimed, of politeness in relation to the body and sensuality. So the paisa was specifically constructed in the national imagination as white, rosy, innovative, entrepreneurial, and Antioquia was imagined to be the cradle of progress for the nation. This regionalized racialization that paints Medellin as a place more energetic, more innovative, a place of beauty with exceptional language, a softer spirit, a more romantic than raw sexuality, all of those still shape the narratives today around the city's cultural producers and the idea of Medallo as a new reggaeton capital. So Fade's narrative about being a hardworking upstart who writes music that women want sung to them, and his claims to the special set-apart quality of paisa identity in contrast to Caribbean and coastal styles, has resonances with this broader Antioqueño exceptionalism. So Fade offers an aesthetic world that young men can find themselves in. A barrio masculinity paisa style that remixes what is called the Nea aesthetic in Medellin. In the words of a young TikToker, Nea es una estilo de vida, a combination of a barrio lifestyle of parchando, sportswear and strange combos, la siete, which is the mullet hairstyle, ropa ancha, jerseys, motos, and this overall unkempt vibe. Siendo Nea is not necessarily about material excess. It's about being a little grungy. It's not really about violence. It's about a chill street vibe, not an aggressive one. I know this quote as well. To be Nea is to have an unserious street masculinity centered on chilling with the boys and not caring too much. Fade's aesthetic deliberately elevates and disseminates the cachet of ordinary paisa guys. But Fade's look is also shaped by transnational flows of style. He samples the aesthetics of nu metal and rap icons like Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst and Eminem, and the late 90s and early 2000s moment where white artists were appropriating black style and sounds. Fade is the funhouse image of Fred Durst, the tragic fashion icon with his red backwards fitted. But rather than the red of rage, Fade chose the green of hope and growth and new beginnings. Fade, the savvy artist with his graphic designer sister and his art history professor father, knows the power of iconic, imitable adornment. So the same way Durst and Eminem spawned imitators, Fade also wants fans to copy his style as a way to grow his community. And post-Bad Bunny reggaeton superstardom, I think also means offering a clear way for fans to dress themselves into a world and to be able to feel and look an identity with just a purchase. So, switching gears, we're going to Rao now. So, Rao's Saturno, an aesthetic provocation, centers not on regional specificity like Fade, but on a techno-futurism that offers commentary on sex, alienation, and labor. His Punto 40 music video opens with a chrome gun being assembled piece by piece in space, as if by the invisible hands of a technological god. Spiked, fortified, and gleaming, the first body the viewer is presented with is not that of woman, but weapon. Saturno is a futurist fantasy that presents us with things of metallic, not fleshy beauty. When I say futurist, and we're like going somewhere else now. When I say futurist, I mean to explicitly reference the early 20th century avant-garde movement of Italian futurism. Developed in the years before World War I, futurism was a masculinist technological fantasy. The Futurist Manifesto, published in 1909, declared that the world was to be enriched by a new form of beauty, the beauty of speed. Hopefully y'all can see it. I know it's lights. Futurists wanted to dissolve the fusion of the two concepts of woman and beauty and replace the desire for the female form with the idea of mechanical beauty. So machines and their parts became erotic objects of desire, metallic, throbbing, erupting, vibrating, pumping. Futurists dreamed of evolving into technological centaurs, a hybrid of man and motor, merged with iron and fed by electricity. So Rao too becomes machinic man, his most viral half gone. In a homosocial futurist world, a world largely without women, technological prowess and finesse is at the core of masculine distinction. In Panties y Brasieles, Rao and Daddy Yankee stand in an apocalyptic smoggy landscape, atop a dome full of bras and panties, and of course they rain down from the sky too. This is reggaeton in the Anthropocene. Women aren't represented in their bodies, but by their garbage and their generation of intimate waste. All that remains is women's material excess. Even sex is displaced in this world. In the music video for Que Rico Chingamos, Rao is in a homosocial world of corporate workers, salarymen in Tokyo. These men are literally corporate clones. They all have an uncanny version of Rao's face. They get drunk in the after hours of work. Like adult boys, they play DDR, they turn the train into a jungle gym, but they never let go of their briefcases, perpetually tethered to their work. So this is belligerent corporate masculinity. Eventually, the salarymen are solicited by a group of doll girls with oversized anime heads. In separate fantasy rooms, they dance, they tussle, they play rock, paper, scissors, and jump on the bed. But there is a sadness here too, and we see one of the men laying in the doll girl's arms, getting commoditized comfort from a stranger. By night's end, they sleep slumped in the streets, their briefcases doubling as pillows. So I think this video reflects lots about the capitalist demands of labor in a post-sex, techno-futurist world. Rao draws on the concept of the salaryman, an icon of post-World War II Japanese hegemonic masculinity, with his dark suit and white collar shirt, the sober styling of corporate conformity. The salaryman works for a prestigious company with his life defined by strict regimentation and overwork. But the promise of white-collar corporate employment and its breadwinner ideology has unraveled with economic recession in contemporary Japan. So on the left, these are photos from the streets of Japan, and on the right is stills from Rao's video. The salaryman has now been linked with excessive fatigue, alienation, and workplace-induced stress in the popular Japanese imagination. There are all of these anxieties about Japan becoming a sexless society and a society without connections. Because it has the world's most aging population, decreasing rates of marriage, and a quickly rising rate of young people who are no longer interested in sex or romantic coupling at all. So Rao's video I love it. So Rao's video I love it. Rao's video explores this other side of futurism and a technologized society. So what we see is emotional disattachment in a hyper-technological world. So in Japan, a loneliness industry and this array of relationship replacement services is filling in for this social malaise. There are many of these, but I'm only going to talk about one. So there are these things called cuddle cafes that offer sexless intimacy where men can pay to hug a girl, to lay their head in a girl's lap and gaze into her eyes. And sex workers and clients imagine this intimacy without attachment as a healing service that replenishes white-collar workers so that they may continue being productive. So I think in this world right now of reggaeton, we have masculine malaise, we have melancholy, we've talked multiple times about Bad Bunny's kind of sad boy emo moments. And Rao uses futurist and post-industrial landscapes to explore the twin dynamics of a hyper-mediatized new machine age and masculine alienation. There are more examples of this in his video, but I only got into this one today. But I think there's also boyish joy in contemporary reggaeton. And both these artists' aesthetic worlds are shaped by their boyhood fascinations with the US rap scene and with Japanese pop culture. So here there's play and power that's regionalized and technologized. And I think that the question I have is, are the effective and aesthetic grounds of mainstream reggaeton shifting? I think Bad Bunny initiated an era of emotional and stylistic exploration, and perhaps we have a crystallizing and fragmenting of plural reggaeton masculinities. I think this too is a moment of reggaeton as global fashion statement, and the regional reggaetonero as style icon, and also imitation as fandom. Thank y'all.
Hi. Thank you, Centro, for having me here. It's been a pleasure. This is the most fun I've had in a conference. It's been so great. On the morning of March 28th, right after receiving my acceptance to the symposium, Bad Bunny's Time magazine interview dropped. A colleague of mine, who is teaching a course on the representation of Latin America in media, sent me a voice memo asking if I was particularly mad that Bad Bunny was dating Kendall Jenner. To which I said no. If anyone's pissed about Bad Bunny dating Kendall Jenner, they've put all their eggs in a white man's basket. Why is Bad Bunny solely responsible for representing all of the Caribbean and Latin America? And why are we still looking at white men as signifiers of queerness or cultural idioms? After watching a handful of videos where creators expanded on their disappointment in Bad Bunny, I thought to myself, oh, this is good. Bad Bunny just wrote my paper all by himself. So I quickly searched the interview, and the reality was much more nuanced. What I could see from the piece is that Bad Bunny's positionality is an ambiguous one, which does not excuse him for turning a blind eye to colorism, but that actually represents or somehow they represent how whiteness and the proximity to whiteness informs the racial political landscape of Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, and Latin America at large. You know, when you look at Bad Bunny, he's mezclao, or jabao, as the Time magazine identified him, and it's worth noting that he's never used those words or any other to identify himself, other than boricua, puertorriqueño. And it is this space of racial ambiguity and proximity to whiteness that stands in contradictions. It is the space between not just white, mezclao, and white enough that makes him fit in with the rest of the white or white-passing Latinos that dominate the musical industry. Bad Bunny's performance in the 2023 Grammys was not only monumental for being the first non-English or fully Spanish performance in the history of the Grammys, but as I was watching the set, I kept thinking that I've seen this before somewhere. And then it clicked. Whether intentionally or not, Bad Bunny's performance paid homage to another Blanquito who took center stage at the Grammys in 1999. 24 years ago, Ricky Martin led the way to the Latin explosion of the early 2000s with his bilingual performance of The Cup of Life at the event. With his 15-piece band entering through the crowd onto the stage, Ricky Martin's performance of La Copa de la Vida received a standing ovation and earned his first English album a #1 spot at the Billboard 200. Nevertheless, what interests me is the significance and complexity of the role that an artist like Ricky Martin and now Bad Bunny played in the US mainstream media. The impact of this performance not only emerged from the movement of his hips, but also because, as France Negro Montaner pointed out in Boricua Pop, it brought white Puerto Rican suburbia to the center stage. In other words, it presented another lens through which to view Latin America, the white one. Not only that, but it revealed what we've all known, but remained invisible to the US media, the existence of a white elite in the Caribbean and Latin America. Artists that exemplified this proximity were palatable figures that could be extrapolated in the US media for the consumption not only of the American audience, but of the Latin Americans already living in the US. So where does Bad Bunny come in? Throughout Bad Bunny's career, there has been various points of tension regarding his passing whiteness. One point of tension was when he chose a white, thin, blue-eyed model to act as his younger self or alter ego for his music video, Caro. Nevertheless, this decision may somehow been overshadowed by the public's curiosity about his sexuality. At this moment, Bad Bunny was starting to use a lot of jewelry, typically associated with women. He was painting his nails, wearing a lot of colorful outfits and 5-inch shorts, uncharacteristic of the trap or reggaeton aesthetic in the island. Small aesthetic decisions that caused a major uproar, since the first thought that crossed many people's minds, including my own, was to look for cues that would confirm or deny his homosexuality. Many conversations, including those held in the comments section across different social media platforms, arrived at the same question, ¿será pato? Bad Bunny was not yet the star he is now. His rise to national hero status was yet to be determined. We had already asked the same question about Ricky Martin. His brilliant smile, his comfort and ease moving his hips in the late 90s, and his lack of a long-term female partnership led the mainstream media in even my high school history class to speak hours on end about the evidence pointing at his homosexuality. Nevertheless, tension arose if you dared admit that maybe he was indeed gay, and maybe he's still one of the most talented artists from the island. Pero como tú vas a decir eso, muchacha, no puede ser que Ricky Martin sea pato. The national hero cannot fail. The news of his homosexuality and what could be regarded at the end of his peak years came as a confirmation to some and caused others to resign to the fact that one of the artists that put the name of Puerto Rico en alto was indeed gay. Messages changed from ¿cómo tú vas a decir eso? A pero Ricky Martin es Ricky Martin. Ricky siempre va a ser Ricky. The national hero can rest because his work is done. Another significant point of tension in Bad Bunny's career was his Super Bowl performance as guest artist alongside J Balvin, to Shakira, and J-Lo. Fans everywhere were questioning his use of the do-rag at the performance, an item we haven't seen him use as often anymore, not only because of the political implications of a light-skinned man using the do-rag, but also because alongside the other 3 artists, it could be perceived as a misplaced garment in such, and I quote, a whitewashed event, as a Mother Jones article called it. Looking at the forum then, the evidence is undeniable. The way to stardom is through the proximity to whiteness. At this moment, Bad Bunny had released his second solo album and was well on his way to become one of the most streamed artists in the world. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but when I mention whiteness, I don't only mention it in a racial way, but also as an institution, the ones that informs the lens through which we perceive, through which institutions have been built, like academia, like the music industry, film and television. So the conversation about Bad Bunny's whiteness, or proximity to it, or positionality, finally broke the morning of March 28th. Coupled with the Kendall Jenner dating rumors, it had people questioning whether or not Bad Bunny used his activism as a marketing ploy. The national hero is failing. But what does it actually mean that Bad Bunny's racial politics and even his own positionality is mostly questioned when he's dating a white woman from one of America's most sensationalist families? Why were we somehow quiet the previous years when he's only seen with white women, albeit Puerto Rican? Why did we never talk about how black women only appear in the background of his music videos and never in relation to him? And Titi me preguntó, black and brown women are the ones dancing and perreando in the streets, and it's still a white Puerto Rican woman who descends from the heavens to marry him, invoking the Madonna whore complex. Why is it so complex to talk about Bad Bunny's proximity to whiteness? And it's not just Bad Bunny, it's in our interpersonal life as well. Why did we only get mad or we only spoke when his unsatisfactory answer to Time magazine confirmed our worst fears? Maybe he doesn't even know he's kind of white, but how could he not? I want us to think about these questions and if and why they make us uncomfortable. Beyond Bad Bunny, what does it mean to be white or white passing in the Caribbean, a place that is already so mixed? And Bad Bunny's performance, his aesthetic performance, makes me think of these questions in an area of the world so heavily colonized, so heavily traumatized through all the influence of indigenous murder, slavery, etc. And so now the national hero is in question. Thank you.
This morning, I invite you to think about Bad Bunny's star image and all the temporalities and spaces that interlock around his persona. The Puerto Rican performer has become the leading artist in the contemporary reggaeton music markets across the Americas. He became one of the global reggaeton artists thanks to his musical productions, his collaboration with other Latin American and US artists, and his ongoing efforts to build his brand and entrepreneurial ventures. Bad Bunny has captured the audience's attention due to his gender-bending fashion, his unabashedly raunchy party songs, his involvement in various social issues. In his carefully crafted career path along PR-based Rimas Entertainment record label, Bad Bunny has reached the top of the global reggaeton echelons. As a Puerto Rican reggaeton and música urbana performer in the global musicscapes, Bad Bunny's star image negotiates national, ethnic, racial, and gender geographies and identities. However, while Bad Bunny circulates globally, he is experienced locally. His star image does not mean the same to audiences in Mexico City, Santo Domingo, the diasporic communities in the US, or in Puerto Rico. Thus, following global media studies, I'll focus on Puerto Rico as the local unit where global flows such as Bad Bunny's star image and music are experienced. By studying him under the concept of critical transnationalism, I offer an overview of how Bad Bunny's star image and music envision and activate new social relations while simultaneously following industrial logics of commercial culture. Bad Bunny is a complex figure phenomenon that responds to the logics of different temporalities and cultures. Thus, we need to think about his image in terms of hybridity. Hybridity is the cultural logic of globalization, says Marwan Crady. the spread of capitalism and modernity did not erase or replace local cultures in the territories of developing nations. Instead, capitalist modes of production and modern values got reappropriated into the population's traditional and local cultural repertoires. Hybridization, according to Latin American scholar Nestor Garcia Canclini, describes the sociocultural processes in which discrete structures or practices previously existing in separate form are combined to generate new structures, objects, and practices. Indeed, the concept of cultural hybridity attempts to capture the processes by which cultural mixture occurs and the power relations that structure such cultural dialogues. While the concept has been criticized for advancing arguments of cultural pluralism and legitimizing power structures in the name of cultural mixture, I follow Marwan Crady's concept of critical transculturalism to account for the complex and active links between hybridity and power. Far from being an egalitarian cultural exchange, hybridization occurs within hegemonic processes. Thus, hybridity may be the cultural logic of globalization, but each hybridization is different, and it's structured by different social, economic, and cultural structures. George Lipsitz used the concept of dangerous crossroads to account for the contradictions of popular culture as an intersection between commercial cultures and the emergence of a new public sphere that uses circuits of commodity production and circulation to envision and activate new social relations. Bad Bunny is a hybrid star because he inhabits multiple spaces and temporalities at the same time. He brings the Caribbean, and especially Puerto Rico, to the center of global, predominantly US media cultures. He brought mainstream camp fashion aesthetics into the hypermasculine urban Latin star system, and he smeared with filth all of the pristine and sanitized spaces of mainstream reggaeton. He's a global artist, breaking streaming records for 3 years in a row, dating celebrity royalty Kendall Jenner, headlining the Coachella Music Festival, designing sneakers for Adidas, wrestling in the WWE, and inspiring fashion brands around the world. Yet, for some reason, he's still that chamaquito that worked as a bagger for an Econo supermarket in Vega Baja. He's a lower middle-class kid from Barrio Almirante, raised in the intercultural encounters of transnational soundscapes from RBD, NSYNC, Drake, Ariana Grande, and the already hybrid local soundscapes from Tego, Plan B, Elvis Crespo, and El Trío Vega Bajeño. However, while Bad Bunny's cultural borrowings from trap, reggaeton, pop, merengue, dembow, Afrobeats, and indie music testifies to a dialogue and affiliation with social identities around the world, it also reflects the ability of commercial culture to erase boundaries and decontextualize historically specific expressions and integrate them as a mere aesthetics. Bad Bunny is much a political force as he is a cultural product in the entertainment business. He faces many contradictions as he activates new social relations throughout the Americas at the same time that he addresses consumers around the world. He lets Puerto Ricans envision a utopic future where global culture centers the experience of the colonial subject instead of the imperial one, the utopia of a Latin modernity that challenges the Western cultural dominance, and the promise of a dance floor donde las mujeres pueden perrear hasta abajo without the fear of sexual harassment. Yet, these utopias and articulation of social affiliations are constructed within industrial logics that shape and make possible the commercial success of such dialogues. Let's take, for example, Bad Bunny's Un Verano Sin Ti. The global album was packaged in different wrapping papers. First, we received a sneak peek of Un Verano Sin Ti when Bad Bunny put his Bugatti for sale on Clasificados online. A week later, he would announce the album to the Spanish-speaking market using a video with Gabriela and his then partner Gabriela and Spanish actor Mario Casas. In the best performing album for Billboard in 2022, Bad Bunny delivered a version of a nostalgic summer full of summer loves, breakup, beach days, night partying, coqueteo, and apagones in Puerto Rico. As Susie Exposito writes in the review for Un Verano Sin Ti, for global phenomenon Bad Bunny, Puerto Rico remains his playground, battleground, and muse. In it, Bad Bunny painted Puerto Rico as a translocal territory, that it's always in conversations with other spaces. Bad Bunny's summer in Puerto Rico is shaped by the soundscapes of old-school reggaeton, the pulsating drums of bomba, mambo, and dembow from the Dominican Republic, indie textures of the Puerto Rican diaspora in Nueva York, distant yet rhythmically familiar Nigerian Afrobeats, and Brazilian bossa nova, Atlanta trap music, and the modern 80 pop sounds from the United States mainstream. And while we listen to the soundscapes of different parts of the world, Bad Bunny localizes these sounds to narrate and articulate complex experiences in Puerto Rico. As Bad Bunny said in a promotional interview for Apple Music, yo hago música pensando que es para que lo escuchen los de aquí, los de PR. Hago música desde aquí, para que el mundo lo escuche, como siempre ha sido. These musical dialogues envision and activate new social and affective relations, not only for Puerto Rican audiences, but for other populations throughout the Americas. Take, for instance, the hashtag Que Se Vayan Ellos to speak against gentrification or governmental corruption throughout Latin America. However, Bad Bunny's star image and music are cultural products imbued in commercial logics and practices that center hybridity as a commercial logic. Hybridity is, as you may have guessed, an industrial logic to ensure audience maximization. As Daniel Party has noted, hybrid albums, songs, and stars function as commercial strategies to maximize potential consumer audiences by appealing to multiple social identities. Indeed, Bad Bunny's hybridity functions as a way to interpolate multiple audience segments based on their cultural proximity. Like the majors, Rimas has ambitiously expanded their consumer market beyond Puerto Rico and to delve and foster a Latinx American geocultural and linguistic market constituted by the Hispanic Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South American territories, and their diasporas in the United States. Strobhauer notes that the media industries envision supranational markets based on the perceived cultural proximity of those territories, constituted by elements such as language, ethnicity, and culture. In addition, we can talk about how Bad Bunny is able to incorporate musical aesthetics such as dembow, merengue, and Afrobeats without having to endure problems of access and visibility that Black artists often find in the Latin and Anglo-American music industry. Finally, Bad Bunny's hybridity is also possible thanks to the invisibilized labor of contract workers, such as Nessie in Yo Perreo Sola and Elena Rose in Party, and the nebulous copyright laws that allow him to sing Enséñame a Bailar over a song composed and produced by Nigerian talents like Dara and Joey Boy without crediting them. These are the dangerous crossroads that we encounter in our contemporary popular culture. Crossroads where the pleasure, affect, and politics collide with commerce without any guarantee. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. Tough acts to follow. Really amazing presentations. My presentation is called The Bad Bunny Boom, The Evolving Celebrity Status of El Conejo Malo. And I want to say quickly that this presentation is dedicated to my friend and colleague, Chris Guerra, who was killed in 2013 while on the job as a paparazzi photographer in Los Angeles. His work in life reminds us that all systems, including the Hollywood industrial complex, rely on exploitation, dehumanization, and the disposability of Black and brown bodies. We may be having a little fun talking about Benito at this symposium, but his work is highly consequential, as is all of our work on media and popular culture, which can often be dismissed as unintellectual or even anti-intellectual, when in fact these issues are often connected to matters of life and death for our communities. So, the career of Benito Martinez Ocasio, better known as Bad Bunny, has been a timeline of record-breaking moments since 2019. This presentation will consider some key moments in his career in relationship to the celebrity system I analyze in my book, Manufacturing Celebrity. From his language practice to his presentation of gender and sexuality to his broader political stances, Bad Bunny does not adhere to the typical processes of the celebrity system. And yet, as his celebrity status is evolving, media treatment around him is starting to reflect some key elements I identify in the manufacture of celebrity. So I want to take a moment to quickly explain how my previous research brought me to Benito. So I started my internship here in New York as a red carpet reporter and nightlife intern at the New York Bureau of People magazine in 2004, and then I continued on with them as a stringer, like a long-term freelancer, full-time for about 10 years, looking at gender and racial inequalities I saw on the red carpets and in the offices and among paparazzi laborers. I decided to use this unique access in this world to pursue my doctoral dissertation, which turned into my book, Manufacturing Celebrity, that looks at these power dynamics in this world, focusing on race, gender, and labor, and looking at the different degrees of precarity and exploitation women reporters face and the predominantly Latino paparazzi face, including death. And so this work is really about reconsidering the racialized labor politics involved in the production of celebrity. And prior to that, I had done a documentary on the history of Cuban hip hop, really, again, looking at issues of race and gender and representation in the genre, and looking at how the predominantly Afro-Cuban youth were using hip hop to bring conversations of race to the forefront in Cuba. And so I started thinking about the role that I saw Bad Bunny playing in different conversations about representation, looking at the ways that he ran contrary to celebrity culture, and decided I wanted to develop a course, started conversations with Petra, developed the Bad Bunny syllabus, and so here we are today. One of the questions I'm often asked now about Bad Bunny by the media is how and why he has risen to the level of fame that he has globally. This is the mystery everyone wants to solve. Why Bad Bunny? Why now? Specifically in the context of his fame in the US. I've been asked if it's because the US is really ready for this moment now, essentially suggesting that the US is so evolved culturally that we're ready for a Spanish-speaking artist from Puerto Rico. But a quick news search for Coachella coverage of Bad Bunny will yield more about his love interest Kendall Jenner, or a tweet mentioning Harry Styles that was projected as part of his set, than it will yield about the groundbreaking moments in Latin music history that those of us who were present saw take place in real time, and so many others across the globe and in Puerto Rico, of course, watched on Coachella's live stream. In a vein similar to that of the Grammys' misstep in not properly translating Bad Bunny's lyrics and speech, mainstream US media are ill-equipped to understand Bad Bunny as an artist, literally and figuratively. Instead, they default to the familiar white, English-speaking figures, even though the world has made clear who their top musical artist is for 3 years running. And yet it is this focus, particularly on his relationship to Jenner, that symbolizes this larger transition in his celebrity status. And that is mainstream American English media focusing on his relationship to Jenner as evidence of his transition into Hollywood's celebrity machine, which is what I dissect in my book. Media scholar Bram Turner suggests that, quote, we can map the precise moment a public figure becomes a celebrity. It occurs at the point at which the media interest in their activities are transferred from reporting on their public role to investigating the details of their private lives. So prior to the frenzy around his dating Jenner, there were many layers to his artistry and celebrity status, and those elements all seemed to run contrary to typical American celebrity practice, his politics, his style, and an overall feeling of authenticity. That we were not getting a manufactured celebrity. Instead, we were getting Benito. Yo hago lo que me da la gana, not what a publicist told him to say, because no publicist would tell him to say a lot of what he said. Wearing what he wants to wear, not polished, raw, real, evolving. And regardless of the level of curation this authenticity may have had, it was a huge part of his appeal, and it's what built his fan base. This is what his fans fear losing when he's interacting with and dating the most manufactured of celebrities. So I want to talk a little about how this new moment in his celebrity status, as he settles into his Hollywood Hills home and dates his new American love interest, demonstrate how he is becoming implicated in what my book conceptualizes as the Hollywood industrial complex. As I explain, contemporary Hollywood is a symbiotic web of interrelated industries, including film, television, music, online media, print media, and celebrity management. This system constantly generates and promotes celebrity personas in order to stimulate the consumption of media and vice versa. These celebrities are admired and celebrated in contemporary society simply for being celebrities, for being pronounced worthy of celebration by the very system that manufactures them. And again, up until recently, Bad Bunny had not seemed to be implicated in this machine. I want to connect Bad Bunny's celebrity to two key ideas that I explore in my book. One of those points emerges from my chapter, Latinos Selling Celebrity, Economies and Ethics of Paparazzi Work, where I specifically discuss how BIPOC celebrities are actively devalued in the celebrity photo market. And the predominantly Latino paparazzi who shoot the celebrities are keenly aware of the fact that the bodies that are valued are not ones that look like their own, and their complex feelings around that. The second point, which is also entirely related, emerges from my chapter, Brad and Angelina, and now Brangelina, which examines the specific tactic of celebrity couple name combining that was used by celebrity media to promote feelings of intimacy with celebrities among fans. The name Brangelina is used as a case study in the very deliberate marketing of white heterosexual love. Much of my research for my book involved me working as a reporter for People magazine, but it also involved me working alongside paparazzi, going on ride-alongs and shoots with them. And one thing I learned is that if paparazzi shoot people of color and those photos don't sell, they will be less likely to take more photos of those same people or even other people of color in general. It comes down to simple economics. Which photos, which faces, and bodies will make them money. Photos of BIPOC celebrities have proven to earn paparazzi less money than photos of white celebrities. Celebrities of color are noticeably underrepresented in Hollywood, and this correlates directly with their value in magazines. If they are not cast, they do not receive symbolic economic capital through promotion via media like celebrity magazines and websites that purchase paparazzi photos the most. This all contributes to an economy of celebrity bodies in which white bodies are systematically attributed more value. The racial hierarchies built into the various realms of the entertainment industry reinforce the racism that is at its core, and of course, that of all institutions. And this extends even to the ways in which celebrity couples are marketed and valued, and the ways their children are valued. So for example, photos of Jennifer Lopez and Marc Anthony's twins were bought by People, but for less than half the price of what they paid for the pictures of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's twins. So it's $14 million for pictures of the Brangelina twins, as opposed to $6 million for the photos of Jennifer Lopez and Marc Anthony. It should not come as a surprise then that one of the paparazzi who I worked with on my book, who also happened to get the first sets of the photos of Bad Bunny and Kendall Jenner together, told me that the sale of Bad Bunny paparazzi shots to American celebrity media rely on the connection to and presence of Kendall Jenner. When reflecting on the second time he shot Kendall and Bad Bunny, the young Latino paparazzo who goes by the name Nemo told me that whether or not they get photos of Bad Bunny and Kendall Jenner, quote, ultimately boils down to Bad Bunny, because Kylie and Kendall are all about the media coverage. He is a little more private, end quote. As media scholar Alice Leppert notes, the Kardashian-Jenner family has reaped profits as a result of the promotion of their romantic relationships. They are invested in the circulation of intimacy. And now Bad Bunny is implicated in the Kardashian-Jenner machine. Perhaps for the first time, it feels like he may not have full curatorial control over his persona. Still, as Nemo said, quote, even with his status, meaning his status is the biggest music star in the world, this story is Kendall. That's the hook. Bad Bunny on his own, we don't really care. I'm not going to be pissed if I miss Bad Bunny alone, end quote. Even as the biggest music star in the world, it's not enough when you're a Puerto Rican, when you're not seen as mainstream by the Hollywood industrial complex, meaning regardless of how my colleagues have discussed these important commentaries on his race and positionality, he is not seen as or treated as white in the industry. On the contrary, he's continually racialized through language and other features as other. So for the Met Gala, the Vogue broadcast was so invested in having Kendall appear next to Benito that they manufactured this through a split screen because that's where the value lies. In my chapter on white heterosexual celebrity love, I look at the deep personal connections that people feel to celebrities, which I think can also help account for the strong reactions to Bad Bunny's dating life. In line with what psychologists call parasocial relationships, the anthropologist John Coffey uses the term imaginary social relationships to account for relationships, to account for a relationship individuals develop with people they do not know or fictional characters played by actors. While most of the relationships between fans and celebrities remain imaginary and one-sided, there have certainly been shifts in this dynamic since the development of social media. There is now an opportunity for celebrities and fans to interact more directly so connections can be formed. This focus on the couples really underscores how both LGBTQ+ and BIPOC couples are left out of this practice of marketing of couples, except for in their proximity to whiteness. So like Kim and Kanye got talked about. They were the only couple with a black person in the name to ever be used in mainstream media as Kim Ye, but it was anchored in the woman's name as opposed to the man's name like the others. There were no combined names for queer couples. And so all of this really connects to my earlier point that mainstream media demonstrates how the industry is only interested in Bad Bunny in relationship to his proximity to his white love interests, because on its own, the photos are still not enough for them. I guess the last thing I'll say is that this is just sort of more of the same. In 1950, Hortense Powdermaker did this groundbreaking ethnographic work on Hollywood that said Hollywood people live more or less normal family lives, and it is the current studio policy to do everything possible to publicize this. Publicity and fan magazines have been concentrating on pictures of normal family life. And of course, that emphasis on the word normal when combined with family life is referencing the status quo American nuclear family. And in my experience, not much has changed since this research. The only difference is that magazines and other celebrity media seek this angle on their own and without the aid of studios. So where does this leave us? Where does it leave Benito and the manufacturing celebrity? And what does this tell us about the level of investment in particular celebrities at particular times? I think we'll have to see how this evolves and how he navigates this terrain between his authentic self and the Hollywood celebrity machine and how fans react to it. So lots more to say. Sorry for going over. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like between the jokes and like the witty comments, I think that what this panel is doing is really putting in conversation how we can think about Bad Bunny from different geographies. And that's something that I got a lot from, mostly I started reading Luis's paper and then I was like, oh my God, if I go through this way, it'll make sense and people are gonna be happy about it. Because I think it's important to consider like what kinds of arguments we make about particularly race, because that question keeps coming up in every panel. And when we think about race from Puerto Rico, it's a very different conversation from like what we're having here when we think about it within like the US. Obviously, there's tension there and like sometimes they overlap, but the conversations differ a lot and they vary by time and what's happening. So amazing, thank you everybody. I think my only question is, how do you feel about those tensions when you're writing? Because when you sit to write about Bad Bunny, or you sit to think with Bad Bunny, as the conference is suggesting, because I think a lot of people in the conference so far, in the symposium, have really sat with that thinking with part, in that maybe Bad Bunny's mentioned in 20 seconds, or maybe Bad Bunny is the core of the work, but it's also not about him necessarily. So how do you sit with those tensions of like people presenting their own arguments about race, gender, class, sexuality within the geography that you situate your work in and yourself? And then how does that inform what finally makes like the finished product of what you come to share with people?
Okay. No, this reminds me of a conversation we were having last night, because I also expressed how difficult it was to finish my paper, to give it a conclusion. And I think I was speaking with Alisa, Alexandra, and Nina, and they were all very encouraging. And it's like, just stay within the ambiguity and the uncertainty and the space of tension, because it's not going to be resolved. It's nothing to be resolved. It's something that exists, like within the, especialmente en Puerto Rico and Latin America, como que this. So when I look at it, the conversation of race en Puerto Rico es un poco incómoda, va a seguir siendo incómoda. Y especialmente cuando hablamos de Bad Bunny, como que cuál es su posición, pa qué lado cae. Pero creo que no cae tanto para ninguno de los dos lados. So I think that it's just like staying within. Just this point of tension can lead to so many more conversations that we actually need to have, especialmente en Puerto Rico sobre raza. Y sí, como que yo estoy como más para que como que ensoparme en la tensión y sacarle hilo.
I think I could add something here too. So Luis, when you were talking about like global flows, but music also being experienced locally, I think whiteness and whitenesses are also experienced locally. And so as I was reading about and learning about Antioquia and thinking about Bad Bunny, I'm like, this is not the same kind of whiteness. And I think we need to be attuned to that. Just like masculinity, there are many different kinds of masculinity. Whiteness changes, and sometimes, and I think that's why your work was so interesting, especially what you were saying at the end, we might perceive him this way, but the industry is perceiving him another way. And sometimes whiteness is not just what you look like, it's the status you are granted by outsiders. And that outsider perspective really matters for how you're being read and how others are reading you. And everybody, that audience is different all the time. Yeah.
So, and I have a couple things to add. I mean, one thing though is like, even the very fact that we're parsing apart Bad Bunny's features and body and language practices underscores how racialized he is as other. We wouldn't be having, well, what is he? Well, what about his hair? Well, what about this? Well, what? That's how you know that he's not, that he's experiencing otherness in these different spaces and different ways. And certainly in the mainstream sort of like American celebrity industry, he is being very clearly racialized as other. I mean, I think the other things I would mention is like, obviously we have Jonathan Rosa here in the front who's gonna be doing an amazing keynote and will help give us context for this, I'm sure. But part of the issue is there's still so much to figure out, like what frameworks need to be expanded and shifted around conversations about race, right? Because we're also at a place where, I teach in a Chicana, Latina, Latino, Latinx studies department where like the whole field is built around this question of how Latinxes of all different backgrounds have been racialized and suffered in different ways and to different degrees, right? There's all kinds of questions about different degrees of intersectionality and experiences, and so we need to talk about that, we need to embrace that, and we also need to acknowledge that yes, it's the way that these things are experienced happen in different ways in different spaces, and perhaps we don't even have the adequate language to talk about it, so we have to talk about it because these things are changing. But certainly, I think that in a situation like Bad Bunny, it's like there's so many different lines, there's so many different texts we're trying to integrate and make sense of. And again, for me, the very fact that we're grappling with those things tells us that there is a lot here, and that it's on us if we care about these things, if these are our fields and what we think that there are particular interventions to make, that it's very worthy of continued discussion and sort of grappling.
Yeah, for me, I think I didn't tackle race as a thing, but I think that was one of the main ideas that I was trying to grapple with, because I follow Petra's work, and I was trying to work Latino whiteness, right, or the appearance of whiteness, and certainly he passes as white, como que in Puerto Rico, he's racialized as white, and that gives him a certain access, a certain como que ability for people to identify with him. But at the same time, he uses musics from other parts of the world, and I don't think, the linear argument is he's culturally appropriating Dominican music. But I think, or the way that he has expressed in interviews, I think he has a certain affiliation. He feels culturally proximate to them, and I think there's an affective relation to that culture as well. And that was like something that I was trying to grapple with, like dealing with the affective and that kind of visceral part of it, that you as a creative musician, but at the same time being conscious that is possible because he is white passing, or he could be read as white even though in the U.S. mainstream he clearly isn't, but he's afforded some concessions.
And hence the interest in proximity to Kendall Jenner. It's like, oh, well then can we make this make you more proximate to white, more connected to an established white family that we focus on because of their marketing of their intimacy. But to your point on the music front, I mean, that's part of this, also the spectrum, this question of appreciation versus appropriation, right? This is a spectrum, the representation of sexuality, this is a spectrum, the identification around race, this is dependent on different moments and spaces. All of these things are these spectrums, and we're not gonna get clear-cut answers because there aren't, you know? But that doesn't make it unimportant. We have to, sit with it.
Yeah, I think a really good thing that I'm taking out of the symposium overall is the ways that everybody's engaging so generously, is because half of the time I see these conversations online and I'm like, it's time to log off for the day. And I think also maybe pointing back to Dosa's own like concept of like intimacies as something that's not necessarily like engaging with care or a kind of intimate relationship that like necessarily requires contact. I guess it's also allowing us to just maybe sit with things a little bit longer and see that like things are not that easy. And like it's very hard to grapple with all of this because the second he's in Puerto Rico, he's not automatically made white. Like that doesn't change because the lens that's looking at him may not still be a Puerto Rican one when he's there. And people follow him everywhere. So I think it also matters like what lens captures him, literally. And yeah, you got that one. What are ways that you're thinking with or about Bad Bunny that go beyond what you shared with us today? Like, what are the trajectories that you see yourself taking after the symposium and after being in conversation with everybody here? Because I know everybody here has like their own work on Bad Bunny or thinking with Bad Bunny, and I want to know what it is that you're thinking of beyond this conference, and maybe if you can give us why it changed after the conference. I want the really spicy bits of that.
So I guess he's going to be one of my chapters in my dissertation, and I'm trying to work thinking the Latin music industry, but received in Puerto Rico. It's about how Puerto Rican audiences can imagine themselves in affiliation, yet the tensions that arise when they see Karol G or Tokischa or Bad Bunny on the global stage, you know? And it's about, that's what or at least what I'm trying to get at.
For me, it's more like thinking about how to stay in connection within our own contradictions. A lot of like what we see online about Bad Bunny is very contradictory, and it's a lot, and it's also why sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna close the app or whatever. And in this space of contradictions, which I borrow from the work of my advisor, Lorgia Garcia Peña, is something to like stay comfortable, because it allows for conversations that are needed within this space that is very uncomfortable. And it's not pleasant, but it doesn't mean that you have to skip it. It means that you have to remain.
I have two things. One is very brief, but I'm really interested in the affect in which we all talk about and feel this stuff. Like when we were talking about discomfort, and I remember yesterday when La Gata was saying, like, you know, if I do this with love, kind of like if I didn't care, I wouldn't even be talking about this. And what does it mean to do this kind of analytical work, but also have such affection and like put on your scholar hat, put on your fan hat, like keeping both of those in tension. But in terms of Bad Bunny, I wish I had time to do this today, but he also is like drawing on Japan a lot. And I wish I could have talked about Yonaguni, but we see him and Fade and Rao, they all do the same thing, where they like grew up watching Dragon Ball Z, they love Pokemon, and they're like reaching towards this like imagined Asia, this like Japanese fantasy, to explore their emotions that they wouldn't explore in other videos. And I think Yonaguni is like peak, I'm sad, I'm melancholy, and I think that kind of geographic frame is allowing them to do that and play with masculinity in a way. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up what Catalina La Gata said yesterday, which is that, you know, this, and I tell this to my like race and media students all the time, like, we have to be critical. That doesn't mean that we don't appreciate the work or that we don't love the work, but that's our job, right? But I think there's two things I'm particularly interested in as I continue to think about Bad Bunny. One of those was really what it meant to see him at Coachella as a diasporican from California, and my parents met at a United Farm Workers rally in the Coachella Valley. I grew up going to festivals there, the first Coachellas, raves, all this stuff in that space, and to be in that space and have it feel so Caribbean, so Puerto Rican, it was very transformative. So I'm really thinking about like the impact of, you know, even thinking of, you know, this thinking about Puerto Rico outside of Puerto Rico, like that was this transformational moment for me there in California, which doesn't really happen. And the other thing is really, you know, from this conference, thinking about what I've been saying about him as this artist of resistance, and hearing from Gacho yesterday, and thinking about, you know, when you are Puerto Rican, when you are born into colonialism, it is like, it is in you. The resistance is in you. How that plays out in an artist is something that we are seeing evolving in him. But I think that he also represents this generation that has suffered really particularly as a result of the realities of colonialism and draconian measures in Puerto Rico. And so I think learning from Gacho about his impact in these conversations is really going to shift the way I continue to think about him as an artist of resistance. And so I'm really grateful that this space has brought that up.
Thank you all. I'm really excited to continue the conversation because this is not enough time.
Hi, thank you so much for your panel. I thought it was super interesting. Talking about different whitenesses is one of my favorite topics, so I was very excited. I have a couple questions. So I'll just, first I wanted to ask Alisa, I don't know if you watch Nicky Jam. You know, Nicky Jam has a talk show on YouTube called The Rockstar Show. It's really good. So when Raul Alejandro went on The Rockstar Show, one of the very first things Nicky Jam said to him was like, you know, you're a really good dancer, and I have to admit that when you started, I was like, this isn't gonna happen because reggaeton men aren't dancers. So I think the futurism part is interesting, for sure, but I'm also really interested in how Raul Alejandro in particular uses dance as such a huge part of the persona that distinguishes him, and what you see that as part of the role of reggaeton masculinity. And then for Laura, you know, I thought it was interesting. I never really thought about the juxtaposition of Ricky Martin, which I use that Grammy performance constantly in my classes, to talk about like tropicalization and all of that, right? Because it's like covered in, there's plants and there's, you know, drums. But I feel like there are some like very significant differences between the Grammy performance and Bad Bunny's performance. So, you know, the plants thing, like Bad Bunny talks a lot about how important plants are to him, and his house is full of plants, and everywhere he goes, he requires that they put plants in the room for him to think, right? So he has some kind of thing about plants. That's not something I've discussed with him, but it's interesting. And, you know, and then the drums were very different. I mean, it was a bomba performance. They had cabezudos. So it wasn't the same sort of like, hoo, World Cup, shake my hips performance to me. I think there is a thing about like whiteness, and the music industry obviously values people who embody what I've called Latino whiteness. But I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, do you see differences between these performances and how that might complicate some of your analysis?
Two quick questions. First, Vanessa, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Help me understand the Jenner Kardashian situation. Are they a white family, or are they an off-white family? And is that part of what makes this work, right? Like, are they kind of helping, you know, beige happen for Benito? That's a question that I have. And then the other question is about Benito's own stumblings around race. Like, is he that different from any other Puerto Rican of his background? And is his stumbling around race also a kind of authentic performance of how Puerto Ricans don't really deal with race, you know? And even when they understand themselves as, you know, light-skinned, it's always a kind of qualified whiteness because of the colonial relationship and everything. And so to ask, it is asking of him a different kind of racial consciousness. Is that appropriate? Or is what he's modeling, racially speaking, to the fumbling that all Puerto Ricans have around race? Not all, but many.
I don't know if any of you went to the Saturno tour. Yeah, right. Okay, it was fun. I went in Barclays, but I feel like Rao has more deeply leaned into his identity as like that full body kind of artist. And I think that gives him a very, very different vibe than somebody like Bad Bunny or somebody like Fade. Rao seems, when he's on stage, he seems like the kind of person who takes himself and his art deeply serious. And I think Bad Bunny has this kind of lightness and playfulness to him when we saw him like humping the palmas on stage and all of that. Rauw isn't doing that. And there's this moment in the Saturno tour where everybody's expecting him to do his like famous move where he like goes on the ground, you know, grinds, like humps the floor, and he doesn't. It's like this moment of sexual suspension, which I think is really interesting. And I don't know if it's a like moment of I'm in this relationship, I have this loyal thing going on, but I think Saturno tour was very similar to the Motomami tour as like this grand event where the artist isn't the only person that matters, like the artistry of the dancers, bringing the Jabbawockeez. So I think there's something going on there, but it's really fascinating when I have just conversations, even conversations with my students, and I would tell them things like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be writing about Rauw and masculinity. They would say, oh really, Rauw? He's not very masculine. And I'm like, well, what is he not masculine because of his dance? Is he not masculine because of his fashion? Like what effect is it? Is it like the crop tops? Is it like, what is he doing? Is it like this the way he's obsessed with anime, the way he fashions himself in this like tech wear kind of thing? So, or is it like his proximity to a woman, his loyalty, like his deep love for his fiance, that Rosalia, that makes him less raunchy in his life, not in his lyrics. In his lyrics, like we already know. So I think we're seeing this interesting moment where the like reggaetonero as person and the way they present themselves visually on stage, etc., doesn't always match the reggaetonero that we hear in the lyrics. But I'm excited to continue to think with all of that.
Petra, thank you so much for your question. So in the many versions of this paper, I do go into the differences of the performance because they are very different. And but I couldn't come back from them, so I was like, okay, how do I make this 10 minutes and keep it in the same line of thought? And I'm aware there are many pockets through which to enter my presentation, and I chose to just keep them somehow. But anyways, okay. So the way that, first of all, como que la presentación de Bad Bunny, he was very much upset because he couldn't go to Las Calles de San Sebastián, which he has never been to, according to the Time magazine interview, because he had to be at the Grammys. So he was like, well, I'm going to bring Las Calles para acá because I really want to go, and this is the only way that I'm going to be able to go. Y claro que el performance de Ricky Martin es bien distinto, no solamente porque Ricky Martin como que es un nene de clase media de Coupé, y también su performance aesthetic es mucho más como like Connecticut leaning, como que just like white Connecticut, white Connecticut leaning, como que a bit sexy also because gay, you know, so es diferente, pero lo que cómo los conecté fue la reacción al público a estos dos performances de puertorriqueños. Fue como el standing ovation de Ricky Martin. La gente estaba pasmada, como que no podían creer lo que estaban viendo. Igual en la reacción del público de Bad Bunny, la gente como que no tuvo más opción que pararse a bailar. Entonces, my connection is just like the amazement de que esto pueda pasar de un talento que no es estrictamente americano, de un talento que sea puertorriqueño, de un talento de como que second class citizens que ahora están dominando el market que ellos mismos crearon. Pero sí tienen un performance muy distinto. Y cuando estaba escribiendo el paper, I was just like much more like intrigued about the reaction to the public, the reception of them. Even though like Ricky Martin, I feel like it's a different white from Bad Bunny. Also like their class is very different, and that comes into how they play their proximity to whiteness. So es diferente performance, different perception. Also como que Ricky Martin se fue para otro lado que no está igual que el de Bad Bunny ahora mismo. But I and it's still something that is very not much como que resolved clearly in my head, porque no me quería meter en ese hoyo porque no iba a salir para entonces escribir como que esta presentación, but I do think there's something there that I'm willing to explore more, and even if it just remains that like reaction of the public, I think that's still worth it, because it was como que ambos fueron espectáculos y ambos fueron de puertorriqueño white leaning, so then that's, you know.
Yarimar, I have so much to say. I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds, because these are also not straightforward things. I will first say, in terms of the Kardashian-Jenner family, they are a white family to me. That I think that they like to appropriate a lot to create this illusion of off-whiteness, and a lot of that happens through their romantic relationships, which I think is part of what gives pause to the Benito situation, right? Is like, oh, here we have another person of color who is getting roped into this dynamic, and what is that gonna do? She was recently seen driving her car listening to corridos. It's like bizarre. He gave her a playlist, I don't know. But you know, there's so much to say here just about their appropriation and all of these dynamics. But one of the things, because I have to be quick, I'll say that I actually come to the legality, and as like anthropologists, I think you'll appreciate this, Colonel, as I dug deep into my celebrity work and how was I going to write about the Kardashians, who, you know, not the Jenners, they have two white parents that are like, that would not be categorized sort of like ethnically other, whereas the Kardashian father was Armenian, and there's a lot of conversations about race and Armenianness. And as I went down this rabbit hole trying to figure out how to talk about them in my celebrity work, I found a very interesting early 20th century California Supreme Court case, because I was trying to understand, how did Armenians become so wealthy in the context of California? Well, the grandfather, or the godfather, whatever we call Franz Boas in anthropology, went all the way out to California to testify for the California Supreme Court to argue that Armenians were white. And that was ultimately how Armenians were granted legal status as white in California, that led to them being able to become major landowners, and thus the immense wealth that has amassed in particularly Southern California among Armenians, legally deemed as white. When we contrast that with Puerto Rican reality as legally not full citizens. So I think that there's all of these different levels of degrees of whiteness, but let's talk about legally, which obviously legality is also loaded, but there are certain things that come with that. And we've seen what partial citizenship has done for Puerto Ricans, and we've seen what legal whiteness has done for Armenians in terms of class and representation, particularly in the context of California and Hollywood, and how we have the Kardashian-Jenners. It was all of that access they had historically, intergenerational wealth, all of that. And then to the piece on Bad Bunny's engagement with race, yeah, I do think that that's part of the authenticity. I very much do, because I think what we see is that it's not so exceptional what he's saying when you think about discourses of race on the island. That doesn't mean we're happy with it, but it means that okay, this adds up, as like the memes would say. But also, we see his evolution, like coming to Petra to say, hey, can you help me with the history of reggaeton? I know personally that there are Black Puerto Rican activists who his team has reached out to because he's trying to do more. But no, his publicist did not coach him on those are not, I work with publicists all the time. That was not a coached response. So to me, that is like, oh, that is authentic. He's grappling with it. He's reaching out to Black Puerto Rican activists. He's learning, but he's evolving in terms of what he knows. I'm sure he has more knowledge about the history of reggaeton now. I'm hopeful that with the work he's trying to do with these really significant Black Puerto Rican activists, we might see different language from him in a little bit. But we're seeing that happen in real time. And that's not an excuse. It's really about like, yes, it's not exceptional, and also this is a process, just like us talking about these things is a process, is a spectrum.
Okay, so this is a question / comment for Elisa. Thank you for your slides and what you brought on Raúl Alejandro. He's very talented. But I wanted to make a comment specifically about the ways he uses technology. He fuses technology with masculinity. I mean, I guess that I think from the slides you put and and the way certain forms of his technological appropriation might go into like a lot of intel, like type of masculinity, like hyper. Yeah, it's hard to say because futurism has a very strong, like, fascist contention, and it still moves through that. So I was just inquiring and wondering how you will approach this in a longer version of this project.
Thank you. Being able to kind of dissect this in this manner is something that's very refreshing. It's not something that we all get to do on a day-to-day basis, so thank you for that. To contrast that, most of the consuming public that sees Bad Bunny does so on a surface level, so it's very much about optics when you think about what it is that we make our decisions based upon. So I'm going to ground this on Puerto Rico versus everybody else, and are we losing him, right? So when we think about his platform, when he began, it was, and even to some degree now, it's so Puerto Rico. I'm my island, I'm making my music from my island, it's everything Puerto Rico. So then we see him with Kendall, and it turns into, damn, are we losing him, right? And then we think about something like even as recent as last night when he's at the game with Kendall, but yet in Puerto Rico, it was the biggest BSN basketball event ever where Floyd Mayweather played, DJ Khaled played in Santurce, in the arena, which he co-owns the team at, right? So he's there again with Kendall. Are we losing him, right? And then you think about UTA, which is his talent agency, and the people that work most directly with him are primarily white. So how much of what's happening is by design and how much of it is fabricated, right? So that my question kind of like sits in that place. Like how much of this is, even the things that he says, why aren't people coaching him a little bit to kind of, is that by design? Or is the thing with Kendall fabricated? And are we okay in thinking like, are we losing him? So that's kind of where my head's at.
Thank you for all of your talks. I'm thinking really about the genre of reggaeton and how it's a Black genre, right? And so as a lot of y'all are talking about whiteness or troubling whiteness, this affect that I see in Puerto Rico a lot, like an unchanging structure, is kind of anti-Blackness, right? And we respond to that in however uncomfortableness, maybe we're used to it so we don't notice it as much. Or in this moment, like to echo what the person just said, right? Like, are we losing him? What might that feel like for Black reggaetoneros, right? Who have been kind of feeling, oh, we've been losing him. In this vein, I'm thinking about the articulations of masculinity, and I wanted to bring up Zaire Disney Flores' urban masculinity in Puerto Rico, which is Black, and caseríos, and how that lies in tension with like these other masculinities, especially this idea of boyish joy, which to me reminds me of Black joy, and technofuturism. How is that different from Afrofuturism, right? Thank you.
Yes. So my question, I'm wondering if when we think about Bad Bunny in the context of the U.S., should we really be thinking about, his experience with xenophobia, or in the context of xenophobia, rather the racialization? Because if we know that he gets racialized in Puerto Rico, whether he's aware of it or not, right? As a person that benefits from the dominant culture in Puerto Rico, right? We can understand why he would not have an understanding of race in the genre, because he is coming from a place of privilege, right? So we can agree on that. So somebody who is racialized and who has that privilege now is in the context of the U.S., I mean, is he getting racialized, or is he just dealing with xenophobia because he is from, an other from an island, that is in proximity, looks like, somebody that it's a little bit more palatable if you're, in terms of race, but like, is he getting racialized, or is he just dealing with xenophobia? And I say that because I often feel like we don't distinguish those two, and when we don't do that, like I feel like we're erasing, Black folks from Latin America who have a very different experience. So should we really be discussing xenophobia or just race?
Hi, so I was just curious because between yesterday and today I've heard a lot about race and Bad Bunny and how he doesn't assume himself, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think there are two things that we're sometimes conflating here, or that's my impression. One is he's on assumptions about himself and, as Puerto Rican, as a I think you have all discussed this a lot. And the other thing is him as an activist, or a lack of activism regarding Black Lives Matter. Gara said it yesterday, and now you mentioned, Vanessa, his contact. So I think as someone, I personally studied a lot of sports as a popular culture, and this discussion has happened a lot. I mean, if you have studied like the whole comment about Jordan not being activist as opposed to now LeBron, etc., and how black athletes have joined the Black Lives Matter, and how the ones that don't are, usually punished. So, I mean, I'm thinking of Bad Bunny in this context, in a larger context of an artist, part of popular culture, and how the public perceive and how the public expect of him. So now I'm thinking, what if he was very racially conscious and then he didn't have the political conscious and he didn't do El Apagón? Then we would be grilling him, okay, you are racially conscious, but then what about the political? Why are you not aware of political Puerto Rican colonization? So I'm just thinking that sometimes we raise the expectations so high. I mean, I was a diehard Jordan fan, and at some point I was like, shit, just say something about race, but then, I mean, he's not Malcolm X. I mean, why does he need to be Malcolm X and also play amazing basketball? So sometimes expectations get too high, and I think the whole idea of losing him, he just sings. I mean, like, it's amazing that he does El Apagón. It's amazing. It would be great if he also have political conscious, but he can be Lolita and Malcolm X and also an amazing rapper. I mean, that's my point. Sorry.
I'd love to hear more from you in the future, potentially a paper, because I think it's or like an article on his engagement with WWE and like the straight male version of like telenovelas and pageants and how that fits into the narrative. Like Backlash was so much fun to watch, especially with the Puerto Rican audience and how he started playing with that. But anyway, I think I saw just one image, but in terms of this sort of like the representation, I think there's a lot of like really interesting stuff there. But I also have a question from our Zoom audience, so I'm going to close out with that. And it's like, what do you think when a person that is so public and politically engaged starts a personal relationship with a person that kind of represents a total opposite, being that Jenner has history with cultural appropriation and really sort of like tone deaf. Generally, especially they're referring to the Pepsi ad where she offers the soda to the cops. Does that make him a hypocrite? How will he keep his relatable persona to Puerto Ricans? So, yeah.
Those are all great questions. Let's try to keep the answer short. Sorry.
So take your question real quick. I think what is happening is that Black Puerto Rico, at least in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican artists are starting to do trap instead of reggaeton. Eladio, Mike Towers, it's like, and even when Mike Towers does reggaeton, it's like, this is me going global. It's not like, and then trap, this is for the people that listen to me. So I think they're finding that expression in trap music instead of reggaeton, even though they kind of do both. Yes, and it has been going for a long time. Wayne Marshall has from black music to reggaeton Latino. And then here, hybridity as like these spaces clashing, because then Bad Bunny's not rooted in Puerto Rico. He's now like full mainstream, full US. And it's that feeling of we're losing him to the territory and the commercial aspect to it, because if he's not Puerto Rican, then he's not authentic, and that kind of that clashing, and that also happens with other artists that try to do Puerto Rican stuff or Dominican stuff, and they kind of flop because it feels inauthentic, and when those territories kind of collide, no guarantees. That's
Yeah, I think the last two questions are a bit related also in the sense of like the expectations, and I think that is true that you can't put all the expectations onto like all the eggs in Bad Bunny's basket to carry this representation, to be politically eloquent, etc. And in the Time magazine interview, he does, in the Spanish version, I think he does. I don't know if I read it correctly, but it is perceived that he's a bit annoyed, and he's like, why aren't you asking these questions to Daddy Yankee? Why it's always to me? And, you kind of started your career with voicing a lot of issues that maybe trap reggaetoneros like como que are not speaking about, not because maybe they're not interested, pero porque hacen música, como que no, tampoco son políticos, so, and I think that, and I understand, like, I can see where this annoyance is coming from, but at the same time, like, but you kind of did this. You kind of created this expectation, and you kept como que subiéndole. So now if you make one mistake, como que la media, social media, and it's going to be extrapolated y como que you're going to be heavily judged by it. So yeah, I think that we cannot como que put too many expectations on him, also because he comes in a position of privilege, and also como que again, as Vanessa said, like I think we all hope, I think he's moving into a more like awareness, into more vocabulary and how to speak about these things, and more comfort, but it may take him some time because also I think he has other interests. But yeah, and also the connection, and also the Kardashians are also white, they're suddenly starting to date a lot of white people, so that's also like very interesting to keep in mind with how Bad Bunny plays into this. And so like that's also in the como que train of thought of like, are we losing him because the Kardashians are also getting closer to whiteness with the men that they're dating now and marrying. So where does Bad Bunny come in, and is he being a hypocrite? Como que does he know? It is rumored that he rejected to be the spokesperson for Kendall Jenner's tequila, which is like, but also como que, yeah, como que, that was part of the conversation. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both. I'm trying to find everybody for these questions and challenges. I wrote like a whole map of things down, but I'm going to try to just like hit a few. So the Dinzy Flores piece, I was thinking through so much, especially because I think that piece really helps us see how reggaetoneros draw on like urban aesthetics as a way to construct authenticity, whether or not they're from the actual places that they are showing visually in their videos. And I think Fade is doing that in this like specifically Medallo way, even though, as I said, he's the kid of a professor and like this, his mom is a psychologist, but he's still like, this is this street look I can give you, and that's this way of delivering authenticity. So I think kind of in the register that other people have been talking about, thinking about whatever urban aesthetics look like in reggaeton, but regionalizing that and localizing that, I think is really important, in addition to the racial analysis that comes along with that. And then I love your question, and then the other question I got about futurism. And I think I've been up here like, oh, the plural masculinities, plural whitenesses, plural futurisms. But I think we're in this moment where I wasn't the only one playing with futurist aesthetics. And we haven't talked about Arca at all in here, maybe, right? Maybe a little, but Arca. And I think we have Afrofuturism, we have queer futurisms going on. And so I want to continue to think with that and think, like, if we juxtapose these different futurisms, if we think about Arca's futurism and Rao's futurism and this idea of like a machinic age, a society that can like auto-generate itself, I think that looks very different when Rao does it than when Arca does it. Yeah. And so I think who is enacting and playing with these aesthetics really matters. And can we, I think the other question I got, I'm trying to look for the person who asked, but the other question was about futurism and its fascist origins, which I was reading about a lot and thinking about, but didn't have time to deal with it in here. But this idea that if men have machines, men don't need women anymore. And I think we can't understand, this is like a weird person to bring up, but I think we can't understand like Elon Musk right now without understanding futurism, But I think there's something about that Rao is doing to glorify machines, but what I didn't get into today is the way he's kind of critiquing like this machine age too. He has this other video, if y'all have seen it, the Lejos del Cielo video, where he's like a power plant worker. And he's like, it's kind of this like sad vibe. It's this group of alien-like men working in this power plant. Rao is lonely. He lives in a trailer. And by the end of the video, he pulls the breaker and like destroys the power in the city, like turns off all the electricity. So he's like glorifying machines, but I think resisting machines at the same time. So I think he has a complex futurism. But in other registers, people have looked at futurism as like this fashion aesthetic that can maybe, we don't know, become unmoored from this politics. But I'm interested in like kind of those creative, maybe uncomfortable juxtapositions to, and the way things circulate and flow and detach themselves from maybe their original context. So I think Rao is maybe sampling futurism. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of dabbling in everyone's questions, putting together some thoughts. I mean, I'm going to say what I've said before in the context of the Kendall Jenner relationship, is that I'm going to stick to it. I think of her as frivolous and his work as consequential. And so I think that's where a lot of these feelings come from. And I do think that it makes a difference whether he is on the island or in the Hollywood Hills. It makes a difference. And at the same time, how do we give space to celebrities, to artists to grow and to shift? Because there are different parts of his artistry that he's exploring. And then this question of, what do celebrities owe us, right? I don't know. And what will things look like as he continues to evolve as a celebrity? I'm going to be watching that really closely, because I think it's really important in terms of my own theorizing around the manufacturing of celebrity as a whole. And there's a lot of tension there. I think the question, Sarah's question about anti-Blackness, and it connects to this question about like what do celebrities owe us. And I guess I think back like artistically to a song like Compositor del Año, where he really addresses anti-Blackness head on. That was probably like the best thing we ever got from him in terms of racial commentary. And at the same time, I think we hope he will continue to do more things talking about race, learning more, perhaps growing what he's able to say, and continuing to grow the kinds of work he did in, with Cacho and El Apagón, and talking about political commentary. I think the hope is, yes, we would like to see him do more. Do more talking about race, do more talking about the challenges in Puerto Rico, but what does he owe us? I don't know. So I'm hopeful, and I think that this is just kind of that space to watch, is like what comes next. We talked yesterday about the fact that there's probably Susie Exposito was saying there's not necessarily going to be another Bad Bunny. He wasn't supposed to happen, but he did, and what comes next is going to depend a lot on his artistic evolution. And so I think we can hope and be there and watch it. And I think that given his track record so far, I'm optimistic, but I know a lot of people aren't. So.
Pues, thank you, everybody.